Life on the Texas frontier was no place for the faint of heart. There weren't any lazy days, no idle hands, just work and responsibility, with the ever-present danger lurking beyond the tree line. If you wanted to live, you learned fast, and if you wanted to be a man, you learned even faster. That spring, I was just 13 years old, a boy to some, maybe to many. But by the time the fight was over and the dust settled, that boy had become a man.
It all began one crisp May morning in Clarksville, when a rider came galloping into our yard, his horse lathered in sweat. Captain John B. Denton himself, a towering figure of a man with the kind of presence that made grown men stand a little straighter, slid off his horse and marched straight to my father's door. He didn't waste time with pleasantries, only reporting the news. The Indians had raided the settlements near Ward's Prairie, making off with a large herd of horses, and he was gathering men to go after them. He was going door to door, calling every able-bodied man to join his company. At our house, my father and older brother Henry didn't hesitate to join. When Captain Denton looked my way, his eyes flickered with something unreadable. "He's old enough," Captain Denton said, nodding toward me. "He's just a boy, Captain." 13, my mama said, her voice soft but firm. "There ain't much room for boys in Texas, ma'am," Denton said gently but firmly. "Not if they want to grow up into men who can protect their own." My mama's lips pressed together, her hands wringing in her apron. She turned, looking at each of her sons in turn. I stood tall and ready to hear her answer. David, just a year younger than me, his eyes burning with emotion. John, only 7, bouncing on his heels, and little Jacob, just 5, clutching the hem of her dress. Finally, her gaze landed back on me. I saw the worry there, the fear there too, but something more, something she didn't show often. Later, I would call it pride. It was brief, but I saw it. David clenched his fists. I could go too. I'm 12, almost 13. My father gave him a sharp look. "No, David, not this time. You'll have your turn soon enough." John and Jacob, too young to understand the gravity of it all, chimed in with protests of their own. "I want to go," John declared. Me too," Jacob echoed. The men chuckled, but my mother's eyes never left mine. My father sighed, then knelt in front of me, gripping my shoulders. "You listen close, William, and you do exactly as you're told. You don't run off, and you don't try to be a hero. You are there to learn." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yes, sir." My mother sighed, brushing a calloused hand against my cheek. "Then go, and come back with a grand story for us." By noon, the next day 40 men were gathered at Captain Denton's place. Most had already packed their provisions. Coal flour, parched coffee, fresh-baked bread that wouldn't last long, and enough ammunition to make a grizzly bear think twice. Every man carried a rifle or a shotgun, or both, along with some kind of knife strapped to his belt. There were no fancy guns here, no Winchesters, no 6-shooters, just flintlocks, powder, and lead. The moment that stuck with me most was when Captain Denton's little boy, Bunyan, ran up to his father just as he was about to mount his horse. The little fella threw his arms around his father's neck and, with a voice as sweet as a mockingbird, said, "Dude by Papa."
Don't yet do engines dit your scalp.
Captain Denton let out a booming laugh, ruffling the boy's hair. Thanks, Bunyan. I'll try not to lose my scalp. The men laughed, but behind their mirth, there was a weight, a silent acknowledgement that some of them might not return. We were split into 8 groups of 5, each with a pack horse to carry the rations and blankets. This wasn't some ragtag group of settlers. This was an organized search party, that some might call a war party. I had never seen anything so magnificent in my life. I rode alongside my father and brother, Henry, both of them grim-faced and ready. There wasn't much talking on the trail. Every so often, Captain Denton raised his hand, signaling the men to halt. They would dismount, kneeling in the dirt to study the tracks. Hoof prints, scattered brush, a sign of the 50 stolen horses we were pursuing. Then, without a word, they'd mount up again and ride on. By the second day, the scouting party had found the Indian Trail, leading them deeper into the wilderness. It wound through the south end of Blossom Prairie, past the Beeman settlement, and up into the rugged, untamed lands near the head of the Trinity River. The men moved fast, fueled by determination for justice. On the 8th day, we found what they were looking for. Captain Denton split the 40 men into 4 groups. He led the charge straight into the fight, while 2 groups flanked the enemy on either side, moving like silent specters through the underbrush. Henry and I, being the youngest, were stationed at the rear, tasked with staying with the pack horses. My heart raced as I felt the tension in the air, the impending clash of wills just ahead. The fight erupted like a storm, a tempest of dust, smoke, fury, and the cacophony of shouting men. Captain Denton's voice rang out like a battle drum, commanding the charge with a fervor that ignited the spirits of every man around him. Rifles cracked, sending plumes of gunpowder into the air, and the sharp twang of arrows filled the space, some whistling dangerously close to us. The Indians fought like wild spirits, weaving through the underbrush, their war cries sending shivers down my spine. But the Texas men stood their ground, their resolve unyielding. "Get down!" Henry bellowed, gripping my shoulder and yanking me down to my knees, just as an arrow screamed where my head used to be. It struck a pine tree, and chunks of bark erupted, flying in the air. My eyes widened, my heart hammered against my ribcage, when I saw something dart by the pack horses. I hurled myself to the ground, my fingers grasping for my rifle with urgency, and rolling over and rising in one fluid motion. I rose and aimed over Henry's shoulder, trying to keep the barrel of my gun steady as I fired through 2 pack horses. Henry whirled around, his eyes wide as he caught sight of the Indians sprinting away. I fixed my gaze on the retreating figure. Henry and I ran over to the horses with our guns shouting with defiance. Then, tragedy struck. In the thick of the chaos, I saw Captain Denton fall, an arrow piercing his side. It was as if time slowed. His figure, once so commanding, now faltered. He fought to stand, to keep commanding, but the wound was too great. "Keep pushing them back," he bellowed, his voice strained but unwavering. The men around us fought harder in Denton's name, pushing the Indians back with fierce desperation. The small Indian party, feeling the tide turn against them, vanished into the trees like ghosts, leaving behind all 50 stolen horses. The fighting raged until the enemy was scattered, their stolen prize reclaimed. But amidst the shouts of victory and the relief that washed over the men, a heavy silence settled in my heart. Denton was gone. The weight of loss pressed down on us, a stark reminder of the cost of courage. They'd buried Captain Denton by the creek that they named Denton's Creek. There were no fancy headstones, no grand ceremony, just the whispered prayers from the men who had lost their leader and friend. Then they turned back toward Clarksville, the weight of the loss pressing heavy on their shoulders. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape as Henry and I rode silently with the other men toward Clarksville, Texas. The journey back was somber, the echoes of the recent battle still fresh in our minds. The loss of Captain Denton weighed heavily on our hearts, each man carrying his memory like a solemn mantle. The recovered horses trotted alongside us, their hooves echoing a gloomy rhythm, their heads bowed in unison with our weary march. It was mid-afternoon when we approached the outskirts of Clarksville. The familiar sights and sounds of the town brought a sense of relief. The distant glow of lanterns and the faint hum of life reminded us of what we had fought to protect. The men straightened in their saddles, their weary spirits lifted by the prospect of home. Henry turned to me, his voice rough but resolute. "We did what we had to do," he said. I nodded, my gaze fixed on the town ahead, unable to form a response. As we rode into Clarksville, the townsfolk emerged to greet us with a mixture of curiosity and gratitude. They had seen the dust rising in the distance and had come to welcome us back, their faces a tapestry of relief and admiration. I felt an unfamiliar swell of pride within me, a feeling that I had longed for but never fully understood until this moment. Dismounting, I handed over the reins of the recovered horses, my hands steady despite the turmoil of emotions swirling inside me. The weight of the battle had transformed me. I could feel it deep within my bones. I was no longer the boy who had left this town, but a man forged in the crucible of conflict. As the men gathered in the square, I caught a glimpse of the others, men who had once been strangers, now brothers in arms. We stood together, sharing stories of our trials, our laughter mingling with the tears we had shed for our fallen comrades. I felt the bond we shared, an unspoken understanding that we had crossed a threshold, emerging from the fire as something greater than ourselves. Henry clapped me on the back, his eyes sparkling with a newfound light. "You've changed, William," he said, the corners of his mouth turning up in a smile. "You're a man now, forged in the heat of battle." I smiled back, but as I looked around, I knew my journey was just beginning. The town buzzed with life, its rhythm a reminder of the world I had fought to protect. I felt a stirring in my chest. It was time to step into the role of protector, to honor Captain Denton's memory not just in battle, but as a guardian of our community. Together with Henry, we began to make our way toward the heart of the town. I glanced up at the sky, feeling their light guiding me forward. With each step, I embraced the challenges that lay ahead, knowing that I carried the strength and resolve not just of a soldier, but of a man ready to build a future worth fighting for.
Well, that wraps up another Banta story. The whole journey took 23 days. From Clarksville to Denton's Creek is approximately 120 to 150 miles away. The Indian fight happened on day 8 or 9. Banta doesn't really state this specifically, only they found them on day 8, and fought them and recovered the horses in a day. It took approximately 13 days, driving 50 horses back to Clarksville. Life back then was anything but easy. The tales of bravery and sacrifice remind us of the strength it took to face difficulties head-on. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this story. If you like this content and want to hear more, please take a moment to subscribe for the next Banta's Tales. Thank you for joining us on this adventure, and we look forward to exploring more stories with you soon.